Story number 1. I'm a nurse. I've worked in a public hospital in Hong Kong for going on 14 years now. I'm not going to say which hospital because it doesn't matter and because I still work there. I've seen people die. That's part of the job. After enough years, you make a kind of peace with it. You do your work, you care for your patients, and when someone doesn't make it, you go home and you try to leave it at the hospital. But there are things that happen in hospitals that they don't prepare you for in nursing school. This happened in my 5th year. I was on the night shift in a general ward on the 3rd floor, Ward C. It was a standard setup, a long corridor with rooms on both sides, a nurse's station in the middle, a supply room at the far end. Room 4B was the last room on the left before the supply room. It was a 4-bed room, but at the time it only had 1 patient. An elderly man, Mr. Fong. He'd been admitted for heart complications. Stable, but weak, in his mid-80s. Very quiet man, polite. He always thanked us when we brought his medication, even at 3 in the morning when most patients are half asleep and barely register you're there. He had no family that came to visit. The column on his chart where they record emergency contacts had 1 name and 1 number, and when we'd called it on his first day, the number was disconnected. A colleague asked him about it once, gently, and he just smiled and said, "They went ahead of me." He meant they had died. All of them. I want you to understand that before I tell you the rest. About 3 weeks into his stay, I started noticing something during my rounds. Room 4B was at the end of the corridor, and I passed it 6-7 times a night. Routine checks, medication runs, whatever. Most nights the ward was quiet and I could see all the way down the corridor without anything being unusual. But on certain nights, not every night, maybe twice a week, when I walked past room 4B, I would see the light on inside. Not the main fluorescent light. The small reading lamp that was clipped to the headboard above Mr. Fong's bed. It would be on, and Mr. Fong would be sitting up and he would be talking. Now patients talk in their sleep. That wasn't unusual. What was unusual was that he wasn't asleep. His eyes were open, and he was talking in a calm, conversational way, the way you talk to someone who is talking back to you, pausing, nodding, occasionally smiling. The first time I saw this, I stepped into the room and asked if he was all right. He looked at me, completely lucid, and said yes. He was just catching up with an old friend. I looked at the other 3 beds. Empty. I asked him who he was talking to, and he just smiled and pointed at the chair beside his bed. The chair was empty. I documented it as mild confusion associated with his medication and moved on. The second time, a week later, I stood outside the door for a moment before entering. I watched him through the small window in the door. He was definitely in a full conversation. I could hear his voice, though not the words clearly. What I noticed, and I have thought about this many times since, was the rhythm of it. He would speak for a few sentences, then go quiet for roughly the same amount of time, then speak again. Like 2 people trading turns. Like there was actually someone responding. I went in again, same thing. He looked at me calmly, told me he was fine, pointed at the empty chair. I told my colleague, a senior nurse named Sister Wong, who had been at that hospital for over 20 years. She was the most practical, no-nonsense person I have ever worked with. When I described what I was seeing, she didn't look surprised. She said, "Which patient? What room?" I told her, "Room 4B, Mr. Fong." She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "How long has he been here?" "About 3 weeks," I said. She nodded and said, "Start checking more frequently, and pay attention to which nights it happens." I asked her what she meant. She said that in her experience, when elderly patients with no living family start doing that, the late-night conversations with empty chairs, it usually means they're getting close to the end, not because of their medical condition necessarily, but because the people who went ahead of them start coming back, coming to sit with them, getting them ready. I thought she was just telling me a story, being poetic about death the way older nurses sometimes do. Then I started keeping track. I wrote it down in my personal notebook, which nights I saw the lamp on and Mr. Fong sitting up talking. Always a Tuesday or a Friday. I don't know why, but it was consistent. 4 weeks after I started keeping track on a Friday night, I did my 2 a.m. round and the lamp was on again. I stood outside the door and watched through the window. He was talking, same as before, but something was different. He looked, I don't know how else to say this, lighter. Like something heavy he'd been carrying had been set down. When I went in, he looked at me and said, very clearly, "Nurse, I think I'll be going home soon." I told him we'd see what the doctor said. Standard response. He smiled and shook his head a little, like I'd misunderstood. "Not that home," he said. He died the following Tuesday, peacefully in his sleep. No distress, no emergency. His vitals had actually been slightly better that week. The doctor noted it was calm and natural, which is, if you've seen the other kind, genuinely something to be grateful for. I went into room 4B after he was taken down. Just to check the room was in order before housekeeping came. It was a habit. The reading lamp was off, but the chair beside his bed had been moved. It was pulled close to the bed, facing it, the way you'd pull a chair close when you're sitting with someone and you want to really be there with them. We hadn't moved that chair. None of the night staff had been in that room after he passed. I pushed the chair back to where it belonged and I left. I still work in that ward. I still walk past room 4B on my rounds every night. Most nights it's just a room with patients getting better, or patients getting worse, and my job is to care for them either way. But on quiet nights, when the corridor is still and I'm the only one moving through it, I pay attention to that last room on the left. And sometimes, not often, but sometimes when I walk past I feel just briefly that the room is fuller than it looks, that there are more people in it than the charts say there should be. I don't stop to check. Some rooms have their own business, and it's not mine to interrupt. Story number 2. This is a story I lived through many years ago. I'm 60 years old this year. The night I'm about to describe happened more than 30 years ago, and yet, even now, I remember every detail as clearly as if it happened yesterday. Back then, I was in my late 20s. I had been driving a taxi in Hong Kong for a few years already. And believe it or not, I'm still driving to this day. The city was very different back then. Fewer skyscrapers, fewer people. Fewer taxis too. The meter started at just $1, and late-night passengers would compete to flag you down. That gave us drivers the luxury of choosing our fares. I had a habit of prioritizing elderly passengers or families with young children. I felt they needed the ride more than others. On that particular night, it was close to midnight. I had just dropped off a family I had picked up from Diamond Hill and driven all the way out to the New Territories. Now I was heading back in the direction of Kowloon. That was when I saw them. An old man and a little girl standing by the side of a quiet, deserted road. It had started to rain, and both of them were soaked under the pale amber glow of a street lamp. The old man looked to be around 80, his back hunched with age, one hand gripping the little girl's hand tightly. The girl looked about 6 or 7. When he saw my taxi approaching, he waved urgently. I pulled over. I opened the door for them. "Are you heading toward Kowloon?" I asked. He nodded eagerly. Yes, sir, but I only have $20 on me. Can you take us for that?" He looked exhausted, drenched to the bone, and clearly not a man of means. There was something about him, a quiet sincerity, a humbleness that came through immediately. Standing in the rain like that, with a small child beside him, I couldn't bring myself to refuse. "Don't worry about the money," I told him. "I'm heading that direction anyway. Get in, it's on me." I could use the company. The old man looked at me with an expression of genuine surprise, almost moved to tears. "Thank you, sir. Thank you so very much." The two of them climbed in. I closed the door, and we began the journey back to Kowloon. The old man turned out to be a warm and surprisingly thoughtful conversationalist. He told me he was a Taoist priest, what some might call a spirit medium or ritual master. For those unfamiliar in Taoist tradition, these are the people others turn to when something strange is happening in the home. Hauntings, restless spirits, malevolent energies. They write talismans, perform ceremonies, cleanse homes of unwanted presences. He kept praising me throughout the ride. He said I was a good person, that the world needed more kindness and compassion. "Don't lie, don't cheat, don't steal," he said. "Live with integrity and life will return the favor. Just by looking at your face, I can already tell you have a peaceful soul. A bright future is waiting for you." Honestly, I assumed he was just being polite, returning a kindness with flattery. I nodded, smiled, and kept the mood light. But the little girl, she didn't say a single word. Not once did she lift her head. Her wet hair was plastered across her face. She sat completely still for the entire journey. When I glanced in the rearview mirror, I could never see her face. Her head was always bowed. I assumed she was shy, or tired, or simply uncomfortable from being rained on. It was dark, and I didn't pay it much mind. We arrived at Tiswan Shan, a quiet residential district in Kowloon. I stopped the car and pressed the button to unlock the rear door. The old man stepped out first, still holding the little girl's hand. He thanked me several more times before the two of them walked off into the rain. I was about to drive away when I heard a knock on the window. The old man had come back. I assumed he had forgotten something in the car, or perhaps wanted to hand me the $20 after all. I rolled the window down. "Sir, I already told you, don't worry about the fare." But he shook his head. No, it's not about the money. Please take this. It will be good for you." He held out a small package, a bundle of folded paper, tied tightly with a red string. I didn't recognize what it was, but I accepted it and thanked him. "Thank you, sir. Please, go inside. The rain is getting heavier." He smiled and nodded. "Take care of yourself." Then he turned and walked away. While I was trying to undo the red string from the bundle, I happened to glance up ahead, and there, in front of a nearby crematorium, I saw two figures standing in the rain waiting. Something about that struck me as odd. It was well past midnight. Who would be standing in front of a crematorium at this hour? I looked back in the direction the old man had gone, but now there was only the old man walking alone. The little girl was gone. Confused, I swept my eyes across the area. Maybe she had run ahead? But that made no sense. It was the dead of night. It was raining. What grandfather would let a small child run off alone in the dark? Then a thought occurred to me. What if she hadn't gotten out of the car? I turned around and looked into the back seat, empty. Before I could process that, I noticed the two figures I had seen in front of the crematorium were now walking toward my taxi, their hands raised in a wave. I assumed they needed a ride, so I slowly rolled toward them while still fumbling with the paper bundle. When I got close, I pressed the button to unlock the rear door. They climbed in, soaking wet from head to toe, their hair hanging down in drenched, heavy curtains that completely covered their faces. I couldn't tell if they were male or female. It was almost impossible to make out anything about them. It reminded me, in a strange way, of the little girl, but from their build, I guessed both were male. "Where are you headed?" I asked. I hadn't fully turned around to look at them. I was only catching brief glances in the rearview mirror while my hands were still busy with the bundle of paper. Finally, I managed to loosen the red string and unfold it. At exactly that moment, a flash of light burst through the rearview mirror. Bright and sudden, like a camera flash going off directly behind me. I flinched and looked up, thinking a car behind me must have hit me with its full high beams. Maybe I was blocking the lane by stopping to pick up passengers, but there was nothing, not a single vehicle. The road behind me was completely empty. I blinked, disoriented. Then my blood ran cold. The back seat empty. The two passengers who had just gotten in, gone. They had climbed in. I had opened the door for them. I had heard the door close. There was no way they could have gotten out without me knowing the doors only unlocked when I pressed the button. And yet they were no longer there. I looked out the windows. Nothing. Only the steady sound of rain falling on the asphalt. My hands were trembling slightly as I looked down at the bundle in my hands. Talismans. Not just one, an entire stack of them, which the old man had given me. Each one was yellow paper printed with red characters I could not read. And in that moment, everything clicked into place. When the old man had stepped out of the taxi and looked up ahead, he had seen those two figures standing in front of the crematorium. He had known immediately what they were waiting for. His decades of experience as a Taoist priest told him that was why he had come back and knocked on my window. Not to pay his fare, but to give me those talismans to protect me. It was his way of repaying my kindness, of returning the good deed I had done by driving him and the child for free on a rainy night. He knew with the certainty of a man who had spent his life navigating the boundary between the living and the dead that I would pull over for those two figures, just as I had pulled over for him. That is the kind of person I was, and if he had not come back, if he had simply walked away, I don't know what might have happened to me. Looking back, there was one thing that all three of them shared: the little girl and the two figures who climbed into the back of my car afterward. In each case, I never saw their faces, not once. The girl's wet hair clung to her cheeks like a curtain, her eyes always downcast throughout the entire ride. The two figures were soaking, silent, hunched shapes with drenched hair hanging forward, as though they did not want to be seen, or perhaps as though they simply could not be seen. But the old man, his face I remember clearly, every line and wrinkle around the corners of his eyes when he smiled. His voice, raspy but warm, that man was real. And the more I think about it, the more certain I am of everyone I encountered that night. He was the only one still among the living. I believe that when he looked ahead and saw those two shadows standing in front of the crematorium, he recognized them instantly for what they were. His experience as a Taoist priest told him so. That is why he turned back, not to repay me with money, but with something far more valuable. Those talismans were a shield he pressed into my hands, a thank you in the form of protection. From that night on, I have carried those talismans with me everywhere, kept in the armrest compartment of my taxi for over 30 years now. Thousands of trips, hundreds of night shifts, and not once since that evening have I encountered anything like what I experienced that night. But I will never forget it. It taught me many things, not just about the spiritual world, but about people, about cause and effect, about the quiet transactions of kindness that we don't always see playing out. The old man said something very simple to me that night, but it has followed me through all the years since. You don't need faith or religion to believe that doing good brings good back to you. You only need to live as the best version of yourself. Be kind, be honest, help others, and you will be protected in ways you may never fully see. As for the little girl, even now, I still don't know who she was, or what she was. Perhaps she wasn't his granddaughter at all. Perhaps he was escorting her. Perhaps he was guiding her to wherever she needed to go. I will never truly know. If any of you have thoughts on this, if anyone can make sense of what happened that night, please share them. I would genuinely like to hear, because one thing is certain, that night changed me forever. Story number 3. My name is Mr. Kwan, and I am a taxi driver in Hong Kong. Tonight, I want to share a story with you, something that happened to me a few years ago when I was still fairly new to the job. I'll be honest with you, I have never been the kind of person who believes in ghosts, spirits, or anything supernatural. But after that night, I began to question myself. And perhaps, just perhaps, after reading this, you might too. I remember it was very late that night, genuinely late, probably around 1 or 2 in the morning. I was running the night shift, driving a Western passenger out to the outskirts of Saigon. The roads were completely deserted, almost no one in sight, and the city lights had long since faded into the distance behind me. I wasn't very familiar with that part of the city. I had only been driving taxis for a few months at that point, so I let the passenger guide me. Eventually, he led me down a narrow, winding road. No streetlights, no signs, just thick overgrowth on both sides and the beams of my headlights cutting through the darkness like a blade. The kind of place where even GPS gives up. I'm not usually a nervous person, but I felt tense. because you never really know, do you? The man seemed normal enough, a foreigner living out in the suburbs, probably just wanting some quiet, but I stayed alert. It's not unheard of for people to lure drivers out to isolated spots and rob them. In the end, we arrived at a small cluster of village houses. He told me that was where he lived. He paid, thanked me, and stepped out. I turned the car around and prepared to head back toward Clearwater Bay. And right at that moment, I suddenly had the urge to urinate. It was the middle of the night. Absolute silence all around, only crickets. I thought, there's no one out here. Pulling over for a moment won't be a problem. I parked along the side of a dirt road, got out of the car, walked about 3 meters toward the edge of the tree line. That was when I noticed something strange. Just a few steps away from me, half hidden behind tall grass, was an old iron gate, rusted, corroded. It was padlocked shut with a thick chain and almost entirely swallowed by vines. It looked like no one had touched it in years. Behind the gate stood an abandoned village house, broken windows, crumbling walls, a roof that looked on the verge of collapse. No lights, no signs of life, completely derelict. I finished quickly, keeping one ear on the sounds of the forest and one ear on my taxi. I had cash in the car, the night's earnings, and I didn't want anyone slipping in and taking it. But the silence was total. Not a single strange sound, and out in a place this remote, if anyone had been lurking, I would have heard them. I zipped up, turned back toward the car, and climbed into the driver's seat. Just as I reached for my seatbelt, I realized someone was already sitting in the back seat. I froze. The blood in my body felt like it had turned to ice. I had been outside just moments ago, less than 3 meters from the car. If anyone had opened or closed a door, I would absolutely have heard it. I was certain of that. I had been listening the entire time, and yet there had been no sound whatsoever. But there he was, a man somewhere in his early 30s, wearing a white button-up shirt and dark trousers. His face was pale, his frame thin. His expression was completely blank, empty, unreadable. He was simply sitting there, staring straight ahead, not saying a word. Every hair on my arms stood on end. I turned fully in my seat and looked directly at him, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Finally, I managed to open my mouth. My voice came out shaking. Sir, where would you like to go?" He slowly turned his face toward mine and said, "Po, ma'am." I didn't know how to get there, and I told him so honestly, but he simply continued looking into my eyes and said, "That's all right. I'll direct you." So I drove. He gave clear, calm instructions. Turn left, turn right. Go straight, no small talk, no change in expression. I kept glancing at him in the rearview mirror because the whole situation felt deeply, indescribably wrong. Throughout the journey, apart from the occasional direction, he simply stared quietly out the window. Eventually, we reached a long stretch of mountain road, remote and isolated. No houses, no shops. Only rock, forest, and darkness pressing in from every side. That was when he said, "Stop here. This is where I get off." I stopped the car. There was nothing around us, not a single building, not even a footpath for a pedestrian to walk on. The meter read $29. He handed me 3 $10 bills. Told me to keep the change then. Without another word, he stepped out of the car and disappeared into the darkness. I dropped the money into the cash tray and kept driving. Just a few meters further along, I spotted a small bus stop and pulled over. Curiosity won out over reason. I looked behind me, not a soul. No light, no silhouette moving through the dark, only night. I turned the car around and drove back to the exact spot where I had dropped him off. There was nothing, no house, no path, no trace of life, just forest and stone. There was no way a person could have vanished that quickly. I sat in the car, unsettled and uneasy, and then I remembered the money. Earlier in the night, after paying a toll at a checkpoint, I had been left with exactly 1 $10 bill. The passenger had just given me 3 more. That should have made 4 bills in total. I always keep my cash very neatly organized in the tray, each denomination in its own section, so I can make change quickly for passengers. I opened the tray and checked. There was only one $10 bill. I checked every section, nothing. I took out my flashlight and shone it under the tray, under the seats, and even lifted the floor mat. The 3 bills were gone, vanished, just like the man himself. Afterward, I told the story to a few of my fellow drivers. They listened quietly and then said something to me that I have never forgotten. "You just gave a ghost a ride, friend. Your luck is turning. You should go to the temple and pray it back." In the past, I used to laugh out loud at stories like that. I don't anymore. Now, whenever I drive through that area of Saigon, I always keep my windows rolled up, and I never, under any circumstances, stop the car, for any reason whatsoever. To this day, I still don't truly understand what happened that night. If any of you have an explanation, please let me know. Story number 4. My name is Raymond. I drove buses in Hong Kong for 18 years. Route 68, Yuen Long to Tai Po, mostly the overnight stretch. I retired 2 years ago and I don't miss the job. But I miss the version of myself that existed before one particular night in 2019. The version that slept well. The version that didn't check the rearview mirror every few seconds, even when I'm just driving my wife to the market. Let me tell you about that night. It was a Tuesday, late November. Cold for Hong Kong, maybe 14 degrees. I was on the last run of the night, departing Yuen Long at 11:45 p.m. That late, you don't get many passengers. Maybe a few shift workers. Some old men coming back from Mashong. Nothing unusual. I knew the route so well I could have driven it with my eyes closed. Every turn, every dip in the road, every section where the streetlights were spaced too far apart and the road went dark for a few seconds. I picked up maybe 6 people total that night. By the time I reached the section of road that cuts through the hills between Cam Tin and Tai Po, most of them had already gotten off. It was just me and 2 passengers left. A middle-aged woman near the front who had fallen asleep with her head against the window, and someone sitting all the way in the back. Now I want to explain something about driving a bus late at night. You develop a habit of scanning the mirror every 30 seconds or so. Not because you're paranoid, it's just part of the job. You're responsible for the people on your bus. You want to know if someone's sick, if someone's messing around, if someone needs a stop. After enough years, it becomes as automatic as breathing. So I scanned the mirror. Front section, the sleeping woman. Back section, the passenger in the last row. He was a man, sitting in the middle of the back bench, very upright. Dark jacket, pale face. I couldn't make out his features too clearly in that light, but he was looking straight ahead. Not at his phone, not out the window, just straight ahead. Nothing unusual about that. About 20 minutes into the hill section, the sleeping woman woke up, pressed the bell, and got off at a stop near a small village. Now it was just me and the man in the back. I checked the mirror again. He hadn't moved, same position, same straight-ahead stare. I remember thinking he must be very tired, or maybe drunk, or maybe just one of those people who ride the last bus because they have nowhere else to be. I'd seen all types in 18 years. We kept going. The road through the hills is long and winding, and there are stretches where there are no stops for several kilometers. Just road and dark hillside and the occasional car coming the other direction. I had the radio on low, some late-night talk station, mostly static at that point. Then I heard it, a sound from the back of the bus, like someone moving, like the seat creaking under shifting weight. I glanced in the mirror. He wasn't in the last row anymore. He was 1 row closer. I told myself I'd miscounted. Maybe I remembered wrong which row he was sitting in. 18 rows on that bus, and at night the lighting wasn't perfect. Easy to mix up row 16 and row 17. I kept driving. 5, maybe 6 minutes passed. I checked again. He was closer, noticeably closer. Maybe row 12 or 13 now. I hadn't heard the bus bell. I hadn't heard footsteps. I hadn't heard a single seat creak. In a quiet bus at midnight, you hear everything. A candy wrapper sounds like someone breaking a branch. My hands tightened on the wheel. I told myself to stay calm. I told myself there was an explanation. I kept my eyes on the road because we were in a curve and I couldn't afford to drift. When the road straightened out, I checked the mirror again. Row 6. He was sitting in row 6, same posture, same expression, looking straight ahead, less than 10 meters behind me now. I felt the cold move through me, not the cold from outside, something else. The kind of cold that starts from somewhere inside your chest and spreads outward. I had two options. I could stop the bus and confront him, or I could keep driving until I reached the next stop, which was maybe 4 minutes away, a well-lit area near a 7-Eleven. I kept driving. 4 minutes felt like an hour. I did not check the mirror again. I couldn't. When I finally pulled into that stop, I hit the door button and stood up from my seat and turned around. The bus was empty. I walked the entire length, every row. I checked under the seats. I opened the back emergency door and looked outside. Nothing. I stood there in the middle of that empty bus for probably 2 full minutes, just standing there. Then I noticed the smell, faint but very specific, incense. The kind they burn at funerals. It was strongest in row 6, where I'd last seen him. I opened all the windows, but it took another 20 minutes before it was completely gone. I finished the route. I dropped off nobody because there was nobody left to drop off. I parked the bus, did my paperwork, went home. I didn't tell my wife, I didn't tell my supervisor. I told one person, an older driver named Brother Chung, who had been on the job for 30 years. He was the kind of man who had seen everything and reacted to nothing. He listened to the whole story without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a while. Then he said, "Which section of road was it?" "The stretch near the old cemetery access road." I didn't even know there was a cemetery there, but I looked it up later. He was right. There's a small hillside cemetery, about 200 meters off the main road. Very old. Some of the graves go back to the 1950s. Brother Chung said to me, sometimes they just want to feel like they're going somewhere. You didn't stop, so you're fine. The ones who stop are the ones who have problems. I asked him what kind of problems. He just shook his head and said, the kind you can't solve at a temple. I drove that route for another 8 months before I transferred to a daytime route. In those 8 months, I never saw anything like that again. But every single night on that stretch of road through the hills, I kept the interior lights on, full brightness. I turned the radio up loud, and I did not once, check the rearview mirror until I was past the cemetery access road. Some things you don't need to see twice. Story number 5. I'm going to keep my name out of this. I still live in Hong Kong, and I don't want people asking me about it. Just know that I'm a real person, and this really happened. A few years back, I was renting a subdivided flat in Sham Shui Po. Very small, 1 room, shared bathroom in the hallway. It was cheap and I was broke, so I didn't ask a lot of questions. The landlord was an older man, friendly enough. He showed me the place. I signed. I moved in the same week. The first 2 months were fine. Then in the 3rd month, I started waking up at the same time every night. 3:40 a.m. Not because of a noise, not because I needed the bathroom. I just opened my eyes and I was wide awake, heart pounding, staring at the ceiling. I checked my phone each time, always 3:40. Not 3:38, not 3:41. Exact. I told myself it was stress. New job, new place, bad sleep schedule. Made sense. Then one night, I woke up at 3:40 and I heard something. Movement in the room, like someone shifting their weight, slow, careful, like they were trying not to make noise. I kept still, didn't move. Eyes open just a crack. In the corner of the room, near the small table where I kept my stuff, there was a figure, crouching down, going through my bag. I sat up fast and turned on the light. Nothing there. I checked my bag. Everything was in place, nothing missing. But my bag was unzipped. I always zip my bag. I do it without thinking, every time. The next day, I went to talk to my neighbor down the hall, an older woman who'd been living there for years. I knocked on her door and asked, casual as I could, if anything strange had ever happened in my flat. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, "Which corner?" I told her, "The corner near the table." She nodded slowly. She said the man who lived in my room before me had died there. He'd been sick for a long time and had nobody. They found him 3 days after. He used to keep his valuables in that corner, she said. Kept everything he owned in one bag. She looked at me and said, he's probably just checking. I moved out 2 weeks later. Paid the penalty fee and everything. Some things aren't worth the cheap rent.